My name is Peter Hilton, and today I'm going to tell you a story about developer happiness. These are the stakes. This is something that matters. If you want to know more about me, that's why I have a website. You can follow me on Blue Sky, and that will make me happy, so please do that. There's lots of interesting slides with text here. There's a link at the end there's a QR code to the slides online. But if you want to take photos of the slides and post them on socials, then that's cool too. Tag me in, then we can both be famous. Anyway, first I have a question for all of you. So are there any Swedish people here? I mean, okay, that's excellent, because I don't speak Swedish, and I guess neither do you. But this introduces some new words for us. So this is the ultimate bug management system. The key thing is on the right here is this is where this workflow ends. I'm pretty sure that fixa means fix, and nu means, any guesses? Now. Yeah, so fixa nu means fix it now. This is the core idea of the zero bug policy. Now, fix it now or delete it is the work of Swedish agile coach Yasser Sandman. And what this does is this shows you just how simple it could be to implement a zero bug policy. Right? So in theory, having a zero bug policy just means implementing this process. So you get a bug report, you decide to fix it, and then you fix it straight away, or you delete the bug report. And there is no third option. That's it. How hard could it be? So this talk is about how hard it could be. Before I proceed, I do need to clarify what I mean when I say zero bug policy. Because the notion of a zero bug policy is sometimes controversial. So hopefully it's obvious that nobody is suggesting that we will have a policy that there will never be bugs. My key claim is merely that a different kind of zero bug policy exists. This is what I experienced last year on the team I worked on, the company I was working at. Now, this means something to me because one time years ago I was talking to my manager about maybe we should have a zero bug policy, and he lost it, and he told me it was unprofessional and ridiculous, and I can't talk about that. I realized on reflection that maybe the wording was a problem, because policy is the wrong word. It's really a target. Like, we aim to have zero bugs. I'm not stating some policy dictating that the sea will not rise or that the sun will not shine. What I'm really doing is introducing the idea that we would have a bug management system aiming for that target of zero bugs. And here I'm in a system, as in the infographic on the previous slide. So not software, but a process, a way of working. So that's what zero bug policy really is. It's really a system to achieve that target. But we knew that naming things was hard, so we shouldn't get too stuck on the name. That's just what it's called. I don't make the rules. I also want to introduce the context where we did this work. The context matters. And this, I think, is also why we need experience reports like this talk in our industry. Because everything about software development in practice depends. It depends on your context. What I'm going to say does not apply to the whole industry. I'm not claiming that all of you can implement a zero bug policy. I'm telling you our story. It's our team's story, so I better introduce you. Our team is a fully remote team, working together last year, scattered across a few time zones, several countries and 3 continents, in fact. In this story, I'm the product manager. There are 2 designers and some developers. So this is a fully remote distributed team at a startup. There's also a CTO and an agile coach. They're not in the picture because although they helped out and they were important, they were not involved day-to-day in this story. The glory in this story is the developers' glory. So this is who we were. The next thing that matters is what we were doing, what we were building. So the system is a web shop launched in autumn 2023 for Norwegian consumers. They mostly use this website on their mobile phones. What they mostly don't do is use the English version, but it's a circular service of buying detergent, getting it delivered to home, and returning empty containers. So there's an easy part, which is the web shop, and there's a hard part, which is circular supply chain. This is the context we're working in. It's not the world's most difficult software problem, but there are some challenges in there. There are some things that are difficult. There is some complexity. And the third part of the context that matters when you're telling this kind of story, after who and what were we building, is what is the company context we're in? What is the culture? Now, this is an early stage startup with 20 employees. Mission driven, we're thinking about sustainability. So I think the takeaway from where we're coming from here is that this is very small scale software development, writing brand new software. This is greenfield software development using our chosen new technology. We haven't yet gone through the cycle of having to rewrite everything, and we have a very clear business goal. So in some ways, this is software development on easy mode compared to other contexts, like, I don't know, maybe some of you are working on decades-old software at a bank, just possibly. The next thing to tell you about is how we got started. The starting point in this story turns out to be, I think, the complicated part. Now, my inspiration for this, years ago, a long time ago, came from a blog post from 2000 by Joel Spolsky about the Joel test. Now, have any of you heard of the Joel test? Okay, so about 5 of you are that old. Sorry about that. This is a blog post from before blogs were invented, I think. Now, Joel Spolsky wrote these questions to use in a job interview to check out your potential employer to decide whether they were an okay software development organization. And the idea being that if they don't use version control, you should probably run away and not take that job. So what we all did, of course, is we looked at our current jobs and we added up our scores, and we all did fairly well. Maybe we got 10 out of 12. The thing is, I don't think anybody I know ever scored the point for do we always fix bugs before writing new code? And this is an idea that niggled at me for years, that some of the other things, we'd really sorted out on the Joel test. Like, we had decent laptops and we talked to each other, but we didn't fix the bugs. Anyway, so years later, in 2021, I wrote a blog post about it, inspired by the Joel test. And this is when I discovered the fix it now or delete it infographic that I started with, the Swedish version and the English version. And this made me realize that, this was actually a thing that we could potentially do. That was several years ago. So we didn't. We just talked about it and got in trouble for talking about it and then moved on with our lives. Last year, however, I had a new opportunity. So let's talk about last year. Beginning of last year, the team in a retro started talking about the idea. The CTO had shared my blog post. We already knew each other on the Slack, and it came up in the retro. In February, there was another discussion about it. So the team was already talking about it, and I didn't even work there yet because my first day was beginning of March last year. My first day, on a Friday, I think it was, 1st of March, included a retro, and it was one of the topics we talked about. And this was my first time I ever thought, wow, maybe this is my chance to implement a zero bug policy because the team is already interested. So we had some interest, but did we need to do it? Is this something we should prioritize? Prioritization is an important part. And somehow the timing was good because in April there was going to be this marketing campaign, and we knew that would bring lots of traffic, and that the context was the web shop was not quite ready. The development team was a bit caught out by this announced marketing campaign, and this was going to bring a lot of new traffic, television adverts and adverts on the public transport in Oslo. So this is in Norway. The new bug report started to overwhelm us, and it became very real, and in particular, it became painful. So here's the thing. In this context, these daily bug reports, they hurt. They hurt in several ways. Firstly, we had a lot of support requests to deal with. We're daily, dealing with the new bug reports. I mean, to make this manageable, we took it in turns to be the first responder for bugs. So we had a support rotation 1 week at a time. You'd loiter in the Slack channel for bugs, and that's where customer support would post all of the things that customers were complaining about or that they'd found that didn't work. And that was much less fun than doing normal work. We had to keep track of what was broken. And is this new thing the same thing as yesterday, and is it possibly related? And this generates meetings about bugs. And as you may know, meetings about bugs do not spark joy. This is not the highlight of anybody's week. And finally, from my perspective as a product manager, there was another important bit of pain that I was feeling. What you want to do as a product person is do experiments to see what changes can we make to our product that will let us achieve our business goals. We wanted more new customers. So if we do a thing, will we get more customers? But the thing is, if it's buggy, you don't know, because if the checkout doesn't work, then you try and get customers, but they can't pay you. But is that because they don't like your product or just because it doesn't work? So the bugs hurt us in many ways, and we were really feeling that. That was not great. At a certain point then, I came across this post on social media from J.B. Rainsberger, who cryptically talks about reducing volatility in the marginal cost of features. And what I think he means, I think that means the same thing as making support effort predictable. So we never really knew how much effort we were going to have to spend the next day on dealing with a new round of bug reports. Supporting the software was chaotic and unpredictable. So that got my attention. I was also intrigued by the next thing he says, that maybe actually fixing things would be a socially acceptable way of showing appreciation for your colleagues. And that spoke to us as well. We're quite mindful of wanting to show our appreciation for colleagues. A Slack channel called Appreciations, where we share positive thoughts to each other. And that makes sense in an environment where we're maybe not comfortable expressing these appreciations out loud and in person. So refactoring as showing appreciation, or even fixing bugs as showing an appreciation, leads to this interesting what-if question. What if we did that? Would that be nice? Would it be nice to each other? So this feeds into the discussions we're having at the time. And we have lots of discussions. And here's what goes wrong next. Developers are very well trained to seek out edge cases. And we had these meetings full of these questions like, well, but we've got some existing bugs. What do we do with those? And what if we fix a bug, but it takes a while? Or what if the bug doesn't really matter to customers? Or we fix it, but then we realize we need to spend more time on it? Or we've got two at the same time. What do we work on? What if something really breaks? In these discussions, we figured out that there were solutions to all of these. But the discussions didn't stop. It was like a whack-a-mole game where every time you come up with a reasonable answer, developers will come up with 4 more questions like this about some edge case. And this is the analysis paralysis that also happens in software design. Well, it turns out it also happens in team design or in how you work. And we did 2 things to kind of step away from this, to get out of this. So the first thing we did was to stop talking about where we were and talk about where we want to be. A natural thing for me to do as product manager was to establish some goals. So I've mentioned support effort being predictable would be nice, and that a stable system would be nice, because that would probably cut down on the meetings. Cutting down on the meetings would feel like wasting less time on the bugs, and I'd be interested in having meaningful experiments. So if people use the software or not, I don't want that to be because of bugs, but I want it to be because of our later experiment. And as I said at the very beginning, also this is about developer happiness. So that's also what I want for the team. I want us to be happy doing the work. This is all big picture stuff, and this was helpful. This was more helpful than going into definitions and writing down decision plans and things. And besides, why define a bug when, as Nicholas Smith posts, there are no bugs, there are just surprise features. So what we actually had to do was to treat this as an experiment, as a safe experiment. We had to figure out, would it be safe to start here? Would it be safe to try this out? After all, we only actually had a small bug backlog. We didn't have a large number of open bugs at the time. It was less than 20. Like, we've all been there where there have been hundreds of open bugs, and that's a different story. That's another presentation. Anyway, so we have this experiment that's safe to try. So just over a year ago, beginning of May, we formally agreed as a team, let's go team, we're going to have a 0 bug policy. Let's fix the bugs. So this was the talking stage, and it took a few months. So that's the first lesson, is that there was a lot to do to get everybody ready to try this. Okay, so getting started, that previous part, it was kind of complicated. We had all of these discussions. And once we decided to fix all the bugs, that was quite straightforward. simple if you like the diagram at the start, simple. But although it was simple, this turned out to be hard work. So the next part of the story is a story of doing some hard work. Now, at this point, in preparing the presentation, I thought I'm going to show you a really cool burn-up chart that's just going to visualize what happens next. And I was quite disappointed with how this looks. It's not very exciting. It does show us a couple of things, but not too much. It shows that over the course of 2024, we fixed a couple of hundred bugs. And it also shows, actually, that we kept on reporting new bugs and then fixing them and taking a long time to eventually catch up, like the lines eventually touch. So the takeaway from this, first look at the data, is that fixing bugs causes bug reports, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but it does make sense because there's no point reporting a bug if nobody's going to fix it. But if people start fixing them, then you join in and play the, right, I'll give you more things to fix if that's what you want to do. Anyway, so we fixed lots of bugs. So here's a different way of looking at the work. It's a bit more messy, so I need to tell you what you're seeing. The vertical bars are weeks, and this shows the number of bugs that we fixed in that particular week. So not the number of open bugs, but how much work we did each week on bugs. Now, it varied quite a lot, but considering that we're talking about 5 developers fixing usually between 3 and 12 bugs a week, sometimes that's lots of small things. Sometimes a bug takes 3 weeks to fix. But there were times when we had a lot. The big spike in April is, in the marketing campaign when all of the critical stuff's been raised, and that's when we have critical bugs like customers can't pay us money that we really want to fix. There's 1 week where we didn't fix any bugs, and I don't know why. I've tried to figure it out. It's random, so don't be too upset about that. Now, the blue line that goes from month to month is just as an indication how many open bugs were there on the first day of the month. So I'm not really tracking through the month, but just as time went on, we had a period when in April we reported a lot more bugs than we could fix. We fixed a lot, but we reported more, but we never got more than 16 open at any given time. So this is also not some huge number. It was only a huge number over time because we kept finding them as fast as we fixed them. So April last year, more testing, more users, more traffic, lots more work on the bugs. So that's essentially lines up with this spring marketing campaign last year. Now, I said that 1st of May is when we decided to have a 0 bug policy. And what that meant in practice is that for 2 months, the team spent 100% of the effort on fixing bugs. So we didn't do any other development work during that time. This was tough. It was maybe harder work than we expected. It was tough on the developers. But also, it was not unpleasant because it was very satisfying. And it was really working. Like, we were fixing stuff, we were prioritizing the most critical things to fix. And by the end of June, we'd really got everything to a better place. Now, by the end of June, after doing nothing else for 2 months, we'd also get a bit tired of only fixing bugs. Right? And that had become a bit of a problem. We're doing our weekly retrospectives, and we're saying, okay, maybe we need to kind of, relax a little bit here. Maybe we're being a bit extreme. So what happened next was we took the fairly reasonable seeming decision to split our work, to spend 50% of our effort on bugs and 50% on what seemed like bigger opportunities. So the situation here is that we were fixing the more minor bugs, if you like. Like, customers could pay us, but there were things that could have been better about the web shop and about deliveries, delivering products. But we also had new opportunities. We're working towards a business goal to get more customers, and we had an opportunity like making login easier and sign up easier. And maybe that would actually have more impact than fixing a cosmetic bug in some other part of the software. So this seemed very sensible, but it was more difficult. As I discovered in August, where in one of the retros, one of my colleagues wrote in the on our retro topics, how's it going this week? 0 bugs policy pissed me off this week. I talked to him more recently to, just to check. I mean, I knew instantly who this was from the comment. And the reason was, the policy was 50% of the tasks, the next one you've got to fix a bug. And he was in the middle of implementing something on this new feature that was blocked on him. He wasn't going to hand this over to somebody else on the team. Nobody else had been working on that, but because of the policy, he had to go and work on a bug that seemed less important. And so this was tricky to deal with. But what we also discovered here, thinking back, what I discovered is that this only happened once, this kind of friction where we'd gone too far. So it was important to read the room as we went through this and think, is it time to relax the policy a bit? But mostly it was okay. But there is a limit. There is a limit to pushing people to only work on the bugs. Anyway, so, the retros were working. That was also good. We kept talking. Our agile coach who was facilitating our retros was a big help in that. And after those 2 additional months, so essentially after having started work on bugs before this marketing campaign, focused for 4 months, we got to 0 bug day. And we had a big celebration because on the 28th of August last year, we fixed a bug and there were no longer any open bugs and nobody was hiding one, like we didn't have any bugs to fix anymore. We had our first day of no open bugs. And this seems sort of significant from a numbers point of view on the chart. And of course, this is when it gets interesting. Does that really change anything? Because obviously somebody is going to report a bug the next day, right? Bugs happening is not going to go away. Well, this is really the interesting part of the story because after all of this work, we actually got to the 0 bug policy success period. Right? That's what I call this next period, where we'd actually achieved 0 bugs. And then is when you really get to do the infographic. So here's the thing, the infographic at the start describes this situation when you start the day with no bugs. Then you can have the simple process. Now, there's not much of the year left, so what I've got is the same axes, but then from last September to about a month ago. And it's a different picture. Everything felt so much easier when we didn't have a flood of bugs. So with this one exception right at the start, when we were pivoting to a new project, the number of bugs we've had to fix each week has been less than 5. Most weeks we fix 1 or 2 bugs, plus or minus 1 or 2. And sometimes we didn't fix any bugs. There weren't any bugs to fix. In this period, when at the start of the month, several times, and especially recently, we start the month with 0 open bugs, we don't have to have meetings about bugs. The support rotation, where you keep an eye on the bugs channel, doesn't really actually stop you doing other work anymore. And when there is a bug reported, it's really easy to address because it's just the one bug. It's not interacting with some other problem. It's not, perhaps a reoccurrence of a known bug because there aren't any. So if you can confirm this is, if you can reproduce this, then it's something new. It simplifies a lot about the working. There's one thing that's worth mentioning is that we did reduce the development capacity from January a bit, so I'd naturally expect it to reduce by a third after then, but it's not that meant we got a build-up of bugs. Anyway, so 0 bug policy success meant less work fixing bugs, and that's really what we wanted. Now, there are a few other details. We didn't really get a lot of critical bugs. So one of the things we discussed in advance was how often would we have to drop everything because there's a critical bug, and how would that work? Over a 1-year period of 161 bugs we fixed in that period, only 3 were critical bugs. So what this means is that normally when a bug is reported, nobody stops what they're doing. It's just first on the backlog. Somebody's going to start working on it probably tomorrow or today. So the lead time for starting and fixing the bug was usually about a day. 3 times something bad happened, and bad usually means customers can't give us money. So at this point, what happens is everybody stops what they're doing, and there's a swarm, a team programming session to fix that, because at least a couple of people are going to look at it, and everybody else gets FOMO because it's exciting and joins in. So that's great, because that also means you fix it quite quickly. I can highly recommend the team programming thing. Come together when you've got some kind of challenge. That was actually a good part of the experience. And then you do your blameless post-mortem afterwards, and you do your incident write-up. Fortunately, this doesn't happen every month. Another thing that's important about the numbers about how did we do this is how often did we delete the bug rather than fixing it? Right, the infographic at the start started with, are we going to fix this? Are we going to prioritize it and know that if you go down, it was delete the bug? It turns out that in practice, we deleted the bug report 9% of the time. So 16 out of 161 bugs over this 1 year period. A lot of the deletions were generally duplications, really. We didn't really decide to leave something broken very much, maybe one or two, but we didn't really need to do that. We could afford to be generous. Because here's the other thing. Once you've got 0 open bugs, if somebody reports something really trivial, you might as well fix it because you can afford to. You don't have to have these things there. You know, it's more satisfying than deleting it. I mean, that would also be reasonable, but we didn't really feel the need. And I think this is my last way of looking at the data is, what did last month look like? So this is May, updated a few days ago. And most of the days of the month, so this shows the largest number of bugs open at the same time on any given day. Most of the days of the month, there were no open bugs at any point during the day. We had 4 bugs last month. The first one was fixed within a few days. The second one was fixed the next day. And then at the end of the month, we had 2 at the same time. It was not a drama. We fixed them both, and then we got back to 0 before the end of the month. This is pretty typical for the last 6 months. So this is another way of thinking about what does your week look like in terms of bugs. Like, we even had a bug-free week. I mean, that's just great. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about how we work, because I think maybe that's interesting too. It's not super important what the tools are, but maybe it gives you a bit more color about our culture and our context. So I've already mentioned that we have a bugs channel. This is internally our inbox for all bugs. So because we didn't have such a large number of bugs, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for anybody to report a bug. We did not require customer support to write good bug reports. They would say, oh, something is maybe not working in the checkout, and we'd go and have a look together and decide whether or not to write the bug report. So it's important to us to make sure we captured all of the feedback. The person working on the support rotation, therefore, does that, bug report writing. And we'd use reaction emoji in the Slack channel to show if we're looking at it, have we created a task, and is this one now resolved and fixed in production? So the eyes and the ticket and the tick. I've mentioned the weekly rotation for working on bugs. And we tracked all of this on a Notion board. So we weren't using a bug tracker. We're just using a Notion database for tracking all of our development work. And we have on our kind of Kanban board a separate column for bug inbox. So the purpose of this is that our up next column, our ready for work column that we call it, is normal development work. And bugs get their whole column on the board just so that they don't get lost somewhere. They become very visible. Now, most of the time, we hide the column because there's nothing in it. It's also worth mentioning that product feedback in general is completely separate. Now, what I mean by an air-gapped feedback database is that if somebody like a customer or the CEO says, I've got this really cool idea for something we should build, and then tells you, and they want to see that written down, don't put that in your development backlog because you'll add millions of those and you'll never ever complete that stuff. But as a product manager, I do want to capture all feedback. So feedback about somebody's had a cool idea goes somewhere else. The developers don't see that. That's why you have a product manager. And so the numbers along the bottom, they were a bit faint, but in this context, we had 15 things ready for work, 0 bugs, 3 things in progress, and 2 things in review. It's typical, except that 15 things in the backlog is much higher than normal. It's because we were starting a new project and had some new tasks. In general, the backlog is very small. So this is also a story of having a very simplified development process. No huge backlog, no 6 months worth of work planned here. That's not the way we're working. And so this is a scenario where we don't have a bug tracker. I've used those in the past, and they tend to encourage meetings, encourage filing elaborate bug reports, And the thing is that if you've spent a lot of work writing bug reports and filling in dozens of required fields, it's a little bit harder to delete them. So maybe not do that. Okay. That's pretty much the facts. At times it's a bit dry. It gets interesting when we start to think about what might we have learned from this. Now, the key lesson, which is how I started the talk, is that this worked at least once in the history of software development, and I was there, so I feel kind of lucky. I'm not sure if it has ever worked anywhere else, although I have an ex-colleague at another company who says that they were using it, and we've got a hand in the front here, so allegedly it's worked 3 times. Has anybody else implemented a zero bug policy? No, so just one. And I was going to say, did it work? But yeah, okay. So it works 100% of the time, apparently. So it is a little bit interesting to think about, would it work for you? Now, let's recap what our experience was like from this perspective of lessons learned. Fix it now or delete it, which is the infographic with a cute bug. You're only doing that once you've got to 0 bugs. As somebody told me this morning, no, there's only one time on the project when you have 0 bugs, and that's on the first day before you write any code. Although I dispute even that, because there might be a bug in the Gradle script that builds the project structure, so you never really know. It's important, though, that we had no idea how long it would take us to get to 0 bugs. We just started let's try and fix them all. Because remember, at that point, we had 10 or 15 or something. We didn't know that we would have another 10 every week for months. But again, as you know, the Programmer's Creed states that we don't do these things because they're easy, but because we thought they were going to be easy. Right, so that's the software development experience right there. What if we had hundreds of open bugs to start with? I think that would have been overwhelming. In those situations in the past, I've been there. I wouldn't have suggested, let's fix all the bugs, let's spend the next year only working on bugs. So I think, we'd all quit. Of course, there is the nuclear option. So you could just delete your whole backlog. This is a thought experiment, so I don't want any of you to go and do this. So don't go to work tomorrow and delete the whole backlog to find out what happens. If you're using, for example, Jira, and you think that you might get sacked for doing that, then what you could do, but also don't do this. Don't create a new Jira project that nobody else has access to, and then move all of the bugs to that project, and then say you've deleted them with your fingers crossed, and see if you get fired. Maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting thought experiment, but we decided to fix them instead. I think the really important thing about this story is how easy things get when there's only 0 or 1 bugs. You don't have to talk about them compared to each other. You don't have to prioritize anything. You just talk about the bug. There's a bug or there isn't a bug. Dealing with everything case by case is why you don't have to have rules. It's why you can have a simple process, because you deal with the next one and you talk about it. What you don't need is some kind of rule set for determining, according to the definition of bug, what you would do in a certain situation. You just talk about it instead. So I don't know anything about where you work, as I said. Probably half of you work at banks, I suppose. That's the reality of software. But I'm just curious, hands up if you also work at a Norwegian startup. No. Okay, so that's only me. So nobody in the audience has their hand up. So that's one reason why this might not work for you. Who knows what's specific. But I did think about some other reasons why this might not work for you. It was clearly important for us to be feeling pain at the start. The pain of dealing with all of these bugs, meant that we had things to complain about in retro, and we were not happy people at the time, and that's something we wanted to fix. Now, if you're comfortable with your bug backlog, then you wouldn't perhaps have the motivation to do this. It's also important in this story that I'm the product manager, so if I wanted to delete the bug backlog, I could. Again, in your case, I got a nervous laugh from the audience when I suggested that you would just do that tomorrow morning. Sorry, when I said don't do that tomorrow morning. So you might not have been in a position where you'll get away with doing that. And that matters as well. And a third thing that matters is a different kind of pain. Does the culture of your team and your organization accept releasing buggy software every release? Because either you have zero open bugs or you are releasing buggy software. And that's a hard truth to hear. We don't normally say it that way out loud, but that is the reality of software development for my whole career, except for this one time. It's very easy to get used to it. And finally, there is this product management angle of, if you've got a product hypothesis, like if we add this feature, we will make more money, you can't test that if there are bugs. The bugs invalidate the test. And now you're just doing vibe product management. And that's less good, I suppose. I also reflected more about this infographic because of how simple it is. And I wondered also, why is there a cute cartoon bug in the corner? I realized that there's clever misdirection going on here. Years and years ago, I'm a junior developer in Rotterdam, and a colleague and I decided that we needed to visualize our task and bug handling workflow. So we fired up Visio, and we drew this flowchart, printed it out, and put it on the wall. And it was beautiful, and it was complicated. And we were young and naive and didn't realize that complicated was bad in this context, and that we had some way to go in becoming more agile software developers. On reflection, decades of simplification in software development have replaced those kinds of rules and flowcharts with conversations between people. These may be uncomfortable conversations, but they are more sophisticated conversations. So this is the real progress in software development over the last 30 years that I've experienced. The cute cartoon is clever misdirection to make this all seem unthreatening, because the implication of this is that you're going to have difficult conversations. If that were the caption, it would be a bit harder to sell it, but I feel I need to share that. And finally, I guess, the last word on this diagram I'll leave to the famous historical agile practitioner, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who said that it seems that perfection is attained not when there was nothing more to add, but when there was nothing more to take away. And that definitely applies to agile software development. Now, I keep seeing more connections between this story since I've started sharing it this year, with other things. So yesterday I picked up Switch. Sorry, not that Switch. Switch, the book, which is about change. And I started reading these yesterday, and I had a bit of time, and I read, but I only read the first third of the book, and it's really annoying because I wish I'd had time to read the rest of the book and explain how its model applies to this. But the first third of it talks about how if you want to institute some big change, you need some emotional motivation. I mean, it's not enough to merely have SMART goals. You probably need those as well. But you have to kind of care about solving this problem. In our case, this was the pain of having these bugs that was making our daily work less joyful than it should have been. This was important. When preparing this, I spoke to Yasal Sunman, who drew the diagram, the infographic, and I asked her whether perhaps one of the things that was important was psychological safety on our team. Could it be that you could only start this if we had a very healthy set of team relationships? And she said to me, well, actually, no. She's been working on helping teams with this stuff for years, and said that you don't need the psychological safety, you need the pain. If people are suffering, they'll work together on a shared goal, even if they're not used to working together so much. In fact, one of the lessons here is that this, working through this, fixing all the bugs together, builds psychological safety. So one of the harder things to understand about building psychological safety on a team is how to do it. Well, the way to do it, in short, is that you do the work in a healthy way, and that brings you close together. Or, in other words, fixing all of the bugs is a bonding experience, and that was true for us as well. Switch, the book, also talks about how you stop the analysis paralysis that we had at the beginning when everybody's asking, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? A way to unblock that is to simply write a clear instruction for the first step. So, okay, park all of that discussion. What we're going to do now is just fix all of the bugs. That fits on one bullet. Fix all of the bugs. That's what we do. Stop talking, fix all the bugs. Then we'll continue talking. That unlocks, that gets you started. And by the time you fixed all of the bugs, you really understand the situation a lot more. So this turns out to be a great book. It's been on my wish list for a long time, and I should have started reading it before yesterday, so sorry about that. Okay, so let's wrap up here. We couldn't have got started if it weren't for the fact that the whole team was behind this. This isn't going to come from one person in the team. That is never going to work. It may only require one person on the team to not like the idea and to torpedo it. And so one of my earlier experiences as a developer is if your product manager doesn't want to do this because they're dreaming about features every day, then you're building features. I mean, buggy features to be sure, but you're not going to fix all the bugs. So you need everybody. As I've said several times, the pain gave us the motivation, and there were lots of questions. Developers love overthinking things. And this is generally a good thing, just not this one time. Having a shared vision was an instinctive thing for me to kind of promote as a product manager. I'm not entirely sure it helps, it's hard to tell, but I don't think it hurts to sort of set some direction, paint a picture of where we're going towards. It was hard work getting there. So the transition phase was the hard part, and the payoff was actually getting there, because once we got there, everything about our work just got so much easier. It's been great since then. And so since then, we worry a lot less about bugs, and we talk a lot less about bugs. So that's my story of a zero bug policy. It happened, it worked for us. Have a think about whether it would work for you, and if you think it won't work, test your theory that it won't work. Ask questions, and maybe you get to try it out. Before you do that, please rate this talk. Ask me questions, either here or on Blue Sky. The QR code will give you the slides and a link to a blog post that was on the screen at some point. But for now, we do still have 4 minutes left for any questions. If you're a bit shy for that now, just kind of come over here while I put my laptop away and ask me your questions, or I'm here all day, come and find me, ask me questions. Anyway, thank you very much.